The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder. Ethan Blackwood's Remington, 1858, still smoked in his weathered hand as the horse thief crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The second thief spurred his mount hard, disappearing into the wilderness beyond the boundary of Ethan's property. "Take your friend and don't come back," Ethan called out, his voice as hard as the Wyoming winter. The wounded man staggered to his feet, blood seeping through fingers pressed against torn flesh. "This ain't over, Blackwood," he spat, backing away toward his horse. Ethan kept the revolver trained on the man until he vanished from sight. Only then did he holster the weapon, the familiar weight of the gun settling against his hip. The Remington had been with him since Gettysburg, a gift from his company commander. Both had survived the war. The commander hadn't survived the peace. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Ethan resumed his work. The irrigation trench needed finishing before winter set in. Water meant survival out here, just as it had in the parched battlefields of the South. The shovel bit into hard earth rhythmically, each strike a meditation that kept memories at bay, memories of Elizabeth, of the child she'd never delivered, of the fever that took them both while he was fighting a war that felt increasingly meaningless with each passing year. At 40, Ethan Blackwood's face was a map of hard years and harder losses. His eyes, the same steel gray as his revolver, scanned the horizon constantly, a habit formed during his time as a captain in the Union Army that had kept him alive through 12 major engagements. The war had ended a decade ago, but vigilance never left a man who'd seen what he had. The shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or stone. Ethan paused, digging around the obstacle. The ground suddenly gave way beneath him, collapsing into darkness. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding the fall. Where solid earth had been moments before, a dark opening now gaped. Ethan approached cautiously, kneeling at the edge of the hole. His hand instinctively moved to the Remington as he peered into the darkness. Someone moved in the shadows below. The fading daylight caught a glint of metal, a blade. "Come out," he commanded, drawing his weapon but keeping it lowered. Silence answered him. Ethan retrieved a lantern from his saddlebag, lit it, and held it over the opening. The light illuminated a crude underground shelter. Huddled against the far wall was a woman, bronze-skinned with long black hair bound in a tight braid. Her dress, made of deerskin, hung in tatters. Her eyes, dark and fierce, stared back at him with a mixture of defiance and terror. In her hand, a crude knife trembled slightly. Apache. In one fluid motion, she lunged at him, the blade slashing through air where his chest had been a second earlier. Ethan stepped aside, catching her wrist and twisting sharply. The knife fell to the dirt as she gasped in pain. He released her immediately, stepping back, revolver still lowered. "No kill," she said in halting English, her chest heaving with each breath. "You try, I fight." Ethan holstered his weapon slowly. "I'm not here to kill you." The woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "White men always kill Apache." "Not this white man," Ethan replied evenly. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out jerky and hardtack, and placed them on the ground between them. "Food. Take it or don't." He backed away, watching as hunger warred with pride on her face. Finally, she snatched the food, retreating to the far side of her underground shelter. "Name?" Ethan asked. She paused mid-bite. "Elena." Ethan nodded once. "Ethan Blackwood." He turned and walked away, his mind churning. An Apache woman, hiding underground on the edge of his property. He should notify the sheriff. That would be the proper thing to do. He didn't. That night, Ethan sat by his cabin's hearth, cleaning his Remington. The firelight danced across the worn oak table where a half-empty bottle of whiskey stood sentinel beside a tin cup. His thoughts kept returning to the woman in the ground. Elena. Her eyes had told a story he recognized all too well, survival at any cost. Before dawn broke, Ethan had made his decision. He packed a saddlebag with food, a woolen blanket, and medical supplies. As he approached the hidden shelter, something caught his eye. Tracks in the dirt, not his own. Fresh. Multiple sets. Ethan dropped low, examining the prints. 3 men, heavily armed judging by the depth of the impressions. One wore distinctive boots with star-shaped spurs, bounty hunters. They'd circled the opening of Elena's shelter but hadn't breached it, not yet. The tracks led west, toward town. They'd be back. Ethan approached the shelter cautiously. "Elena," he called softly. She appeared at the opening, knife in hand again. This time, Ethan noticed the crude bandage around her arm, stained with dried blood. "Men were here," he said, indicating the tracks. "Bounty hunters. Why are they after you?" Elena's face hardened. "I see what they do, to my people." "What did you see?" Her eyes closed briefly, pain flashing across her features. "Hargrove men kill my tribe, all of them, for land, gold and mountains." She opened her eyes, steel in her gaze. "I escape. I hide. I last witness." Ethan's jaw tightened. Frank Hargrove, the bank owner, the most powerful man in the county. Rumors had swirled about how he'd acquired land rights to certain territories, but nothing had ever stuck to the man. "How long have you been hiding here?" Ethan asked. 2 moons. 2 months in a hole in the ground, surviving on what she could scavenge while men with guns hunted her. Ethan set down the supplies. "The shelter isn't safe anymore. We need to reinforce it." Elena stared at him, confusion evident on her face. "Why, you help." Why indeed? Ethan had no answer that made sense, even to himself. Perhaps it was the memory of Elizabeth, who tended to wounded Apache on her father's ranch before the war. Perhaps it was the sickening stories he'd heard of massacres justified by greed. Or perhaps it was simply that he recognized a fellow survivor when he saw one. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. That day, they worked together reinforcing the shelter. Ethan showed her how to create a false wall, concealing the actual living space behind a collapse of dirt and stone. He demonstrated how to disguise the ventilation hole, how to obscure tracks, military techniques learned through bitter experience. As the sun began to set, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Storm coming," Ethan observed, securing the last support beam. Elena nodded, her eyes on the darkening sky. "Bad one." "How do you know?" She pointed to a formation of birds flying south. "They fly low, fast, big storm." Ethan respected practical knowledge. He'd known men in the war who could predict enemy movements by watching wildlife. Such skills kept you alive far better than any formal education. "I should go," he said, gathering his tools. Elena caught his arm, her touch light but urgent. "Men come back in storm. Use noise to hide. Always do." Ethan studied her face. "You've encountered them before." She nodded once, releasing his arm. "Then I'll stay," he said, checking his Remington. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain hammered the earth, turning the ground to mud within minutes. Thunder rolled across the valley, drowning out all other sounds. Inside the reinforced shelter, Ethan and Elena sat in silence, the small fire casting dancing shadows on the earthen walls. Through the howl of wind and rain, Ethan caught a sound that didn't belong boots on wet soil. He extinguished the lantern with a quick breath and moved to the concealed entrance, Remington drawn. 3 figures materialized through the curtain of rain, moving with the confidence of men who'd tracked prey before. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive broad-brimmed hat, gestured silently to his companions, directing them to spread out around the area where Elena's shelter had been discovered. Ethan turned to Elena, putting a finger to his lips. He slipped outside through a narrow emergency exit they'd built, circling wide to approach the bounty hunters from behind. The rain masked his movements as he created false tracks leading away from the shelter, toward the creek that bordered his property. One of the hunters, separated from his companions, spotted the fresh tracks. He followed them eagerly, right into Ethan's trap. As the man bent to examine a deliberately broken branch, Ethan emerged from the shadows. The fight was brief and silent, a chokehold learned in the brutal hand-to-hand combat of the war, a knee to the solar plexus, and the hunter lay unconscious in the mud. Ethan bound and gagged him, dragging him to a hollow beneath an ancient oak, well away from the shelter. The storm would keep him there until Ethan decided what to do with him. By the time Ethan returned to the shelter, the other hunters had given up their search, driven away by the intensifying storm. Elena sat exactly where he'd left her, knife in hand, ready to fight if needed. "One down," Ethan said, water streaming from his coat. "Two left." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "You kill him?" "No, just made sure he won't be joining his friends for a while." Something shifted in her expression, not quite trust, but perhaps a reassessment. She handed him a strip of dried meat from his own supplies. He accepted it with a nod of thanks. As the storm raged outside, they spoke in hushed tones. Elena told him of the massacre, how Hargrove's men had surrounded her village at dawn, how they'd executed the elders first, then the warriors, then the women and children, how she'd escaped by hiding beneath the bodies of her family, how she'd overheard Hargrove instructing his men to find and eliminate any survivors who might contest his claim to the land. Land that, unknown to most, contained one of the richest gold deposits in the territory. "Hargrove has papers," she explained. "Say all Apache dead, no claim. If I live, papers lie." Ethan understood now. Elena wasn't just a survivor, she was evidence. Her very existence threatened Hargrove's claim to wealth beyond imagining. As dawn approached and the storm began to abate, a new sound reached them: horses approaching. Not the stealthy movements of bounty hunters, but the confident approach of men who believed they had authority. Ethan peered through a carefully constructed observation slit. Two riders approached James Malone and his son Thomas, whose ranch bordered Ethan's to the east. James was a hard man, fair in his dealings with Ethan, but known for his hatred of Indians. "Stay here," Ethan instructed, checking his Remington before climbing out. He met the Malones at a distance from the hidden shelter, positioning himself to block their view of the area. "Morning, James." "Thomas," he greeted them, his voice neutral. "Blackwood," James acknowledged with a curt nod. "Nasty storm." Indeed it was. Thomas, barely 20 and already developing his father's hard edges, leaned forward in his saddle. "Found something interesting on our patrol this morning. Unconscious man tied up under an oak tree. One of Hargrove's bounty hunters." Ethan's face revealed nothing. "Is that so?" James fixed him with a hard stare. "Man says he was tracking an Apache squaw. Says she's wanted for theft and murder." "First I've heard of it," Ethan replied evenly. "Thing is," James continued, "his tracks led right to your property, right to this very spot." Ethan rested his hand casually near his holster. "I've been digging an irrigation trench. Perhaps he followed those tracks." Thomas's hand moved toward his own weapon. "Or perhaps you're harboring a murderous savage." "I wouldn't do that, son," Ethan said quietly, his eyes locked on Thomas's hand. "Not unless you're prepared to draw faster than a man who survived Antietam and Gettysburg." James placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "We fought on different sides, Blackwood, but I know your reputation. You're no liar. If you say you haven't seen any Apache, I believe you." He paused, eyes narrowing. "But if I find out differently, not even your war record will protect you from what's coming." Ethan held his gaze steadily. "Understood." The Malones turned their horses and rode away, Thomas casting a suspicious glance over his shoulder. When Ethan returned to the shelter, Elena was already gathering her few possessions. "I go," she said firmly. "Bring trouble to you. If you leave, they'll hunt you down within a day," Ethan replied. "The shelter isn't safe anymore. They'll be back with more men." "Then where?" she asked, desperation edging into her voice. Ethan made a decision that would change both their lives irrevocably. "My cabin." The journey to Ethan's cabin required careful planning. They waited until nightfall, using the darkness to cover their movement. Elena wore Ethan's spare clothes, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. From a distance, she might pass for a slight young man as ranch hand, perhaps. They moved in silence through the forest that bordered Ethan's property, avoiding the main trail. Ethan's wartime experience served them well. He chose a route that minimized tracks and maximized cover, pausing frequently to listen for pursuers. Halfway to the cabin, Ethan raised his hand in a silent command to stop. His head tilted slightly, ears straining in the darkness. There, the soft nicker of a horse, trying to be kept quiet. An ambush. He signaled to Elena, directing her to a dense thicket of undergrowth. She moved with the silent grace of someone accustomed to hunting and being hunted, disappearing into the shadows without a sound. Ethan circled wide, using the techniques that had kept him alive through dozens of Confederate ambushes. The bounty hunters, 3 of them now, including the leader with the distinctive hat, had positioned themselves along the most direct route to his cabin. They'd anticipated his move. The leader whispered to his companions, "Spread out. The Apache woman is with him. $500 to whoever puts a bullet in her head." Ethan drew his knife rather than his revolver. Gunfire would alert others to their position. He approached the nearest hunter from behind, clamping one hand over the man's mouth while the blade found its mark between his ribs, a clean kill, merciful by the standards of what these men would have done to Elena. The second hunter, sensing something amiss, turned just as Ethan emerged from the shadows. He managed a strangled cry before Ethan's knife silenced him. The leader, alerted by his companion's aborted warning, fired blindly into the darkness. The muzzle flash illuminated his face momentarily, a man Ethan recognized from town, one of Hargrove's regular enforcers. Ethan circled again, using the trees for cover. He was about to make his move when a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind the bounty hunter. Elena, moving with preternatural silence, drove her own crude knife into the base of the man's skull. He dropped without a sound. For a moment, they stared at each other across the body, a new understanding forming between them. They were both killers when necessary, both survivors. "We need to move quickly," Ethan said, retrieving his knife and wiping it clean. "Others will have heard the shot." They reached the cabin without further incident, slipping inside and barring the door behind them. The single-room structure was sparse, but solid hewn logs chinked with mud and stone. A stone fireplace, a sturdy table, a narrow bed, and a collection of practical tools hanging from pegs on the wall. Elena stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of the intimacy of sharing such a confined space. Ethan, sensing her discomfort, pulled a bearskin from a trunk and laid it before the fireplace. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep here." She nodded gratefully, but remained standing. "Why you risk so much? For Apache woman?" Ethan stared into the embers of the dying fire. "During the war, I saw men do terrible things in the name of righteous causes. I promised myself that if I survived, I would never stand by while innocent people suffered." He looked up at her. "What Hargrove did to your people was wrong. What he's trying to do to you is wrong. Justice not for Apache," she said bitterly. "Maybe not from the law," Ethan agreed, "but there are other kinds of justice." In the days that followed, they developed a routine. Ethan continued his regular ranch work, maintaining appearances. Elena remained hidden in the cabin during daylight hours, emerging only after dark to help with chores that wouldn't be visible from a distance. On the third night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple stew, Elena revealed the full extent of Hargrove's crimes. The land where her tribe had lived contained not just gold, but a massive vein of it, potentially one of the largest strikes in the territory. Hargrove had discovered this through a geological survey, then orchestrated the massacre to clear his claim. "He has papers," Elena explained, her English improving daily. "Say government give land to him because no Apache left. I am last. If I speak to Indian agent, papers worthless." Ethan understood the stakes now. This wasn't just about silencing a witness, it was about millions in gold. "The nearest federal Indian agent is in Cheyenne," he said thoughtfully. 2 days hard ride." "Too far," Elena replied. "Hargrove men everywhere on roads." She was right. They'd never make it to Cheyenne without being intercepted. "Then we bring the evidence to us," Ethan decided. "I served with a man who now works for the land office. If I can get word to him, he might come." Before they could discuss further, a pounding at the door shattered the night's quiet. Ethan motioned Elena to hide in the root cellar beneath the floorboards, a space he'd built for storing vegetables that now served a far more vital purpose. He opened the door to find Sheriff Williams and 4 deputies, with Frank Hargrove himself standing behind them. The banker was a corpulent man with cold eyes and an expensive suit that looked out of place on the frontier. "Evening, Captain Blackwood," Williams said, using Ethan's military rank, a sign of tension, not respect. "We need to search your property." "On what grounds?" Ethan demanded. Hargrove stepped forward, his jowls quivering with barely suppressed rage. "My men have disappeared, last seen headed toward your land. And there are rumors you're harboring an Apache fugitive wanted for murder." "Your men were bounty hunters trespassing on my property," Ethan replied coldly. "As for these rumors, I work this ranch alone, as anyone in town can attest." Sheriff Williams, a reasonable man despite his political obligations to Hargrove, seemed uncomfortable. "Just let us look around, Captain, then we'll be on our way." Ethan stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. His heart pounded as they moved around the cabin, but he kept his face impassive. They found nothing in their cursory search. The root cellar entrance was concealed beneath the bearskin rug where Ethan slept. As they prepared to leave, Hargrove paused at the door. "You were Union, weren't you, Captain?" "I was." Hargrove's lips twisted in a cold smile. "I made a fortune selling supplies to both sides during the war. Do you know what I learned? Every man has his price." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. $5,000. "More money than you'll see in 10 years of ranching. All yours if you bring me the Apache woman." Ethan stared at the envelope, then at Hargrove. "Not every man has a price, Mr. Hargrove. Some of us still value honor." Hargrove's face hardened. "Honor won't protect you when the whole town turns against you, Captain." He tucked the envelope away. "Think about my offer. It won't remain open indefinitely." After they departed, Ethan helped Elena from her hiding place. She was shaking slightly, though whether from fear or rage, he couldn't tell. "We need to move quickly," he said. "Hargrove won't wait long before taking more direct action." That night, Ethan rode into town alone, using back trails and keeping to the shadows. He had one potential ally, Calvin Turner, the former sheriff who had been forced into retirement when he began asking too many questions about Hargrove's business dealings. Calvin lived in a small house at the edge of town. Despite being in his 60s, he answered the door with a shotgun at the ready. "Blackwood," he grunted, lowering the weapon. "Risky visit." "I need your help, Calvin." The older man snorted. "Last time I helped someone against Hargrove, I lost my badge." "This is bigger than a badge," Ethan replied. "It's about a massacre and millions in gold." Calvin's weathered face showed a flicker of interest. He stepped back, allowing Ethan to enter. Inside, Ethan laid out everything Elena had told him. Calvin listened in silence, occasionally nodding or grunting in confirmation. "Doesn't surprise me," he said when Ethan finished. "Hargrove's been buying up land all over the territory. Always seems to know which parcels will suddenly become valuable. I need to get a message to the federal land office," Ethan explained, "and to the Indian agent in Cheyenne." Calvin considered this. "I might be able to help with that. Got a nephew who rides for the stage company. He could carry your message without raising suspicion." He fixed Ethan with a hard stare. "But you've got a bigger problem. Hargrove won't wait for federal agents to arrive. He'll come for you first." "I know. You'll need more than just yourself to hold him off." Ethan nodded grimly. "That's the other reason I'm here." Calvin's eyes narrowed. "I fought for the Confederacy, Blackwood. You and I were enemies once." "That war's over, Calvin. This one's just beginning." A slow smile spread across the older man's face. "Always did want to see Hargrove get what's coming to him." He reached for his shotgun. "Give me till morning. I'll find you some Dawn broke cold and clear over Ethan's cabin." He stood on the porch, Remington holstered at his side, a Winchester rifle in his hands. In the yard, Elena helped prepare defenses, sharpened stakes, concealed in likely approach routes, tripwires connected to shotgun traps, barrels positioned as cover. They'd spent the night transforming the cabin and surrounding area into a fortress, using every trick Ethan had learned in the war. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it would make any attackers pay dearly. Calvin should have been here by now. Ethan muttered, scanning the tree line. As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on the horizon, but it wasn't Calvin. A column of men, at least 15 strong, approached with Hargrove and Sheriff Williams at their lead. Among them, Ethan recognized James and Thomas Malone. "Looks like Hargrove got tired of waiting," Ethan said grimly. Elena moved to his side, Winchester in her hands. She had shed her tattered dress for men's clothing practical for fighting. Her face was set in the same determined expression he'd seen when he first discovered her. "I not hide anymore," she said firmly. "I fight." Ethan nodded, respecting her decision. "Just like we practiced. Aim for center mass, don't try for fancy shots, and make each bullet count." The riders halted just beyond rifle range. Sheriff Williams rode forward alone, a white handkerchief raised. "Captain Blackwood," he called. "Mr. Hargrove wants to speak with you." Ethan stepped off the porch, rifle lowered but ready. "I'm listening." Williams glanced nervously over his shoulder, then back to Ethan. "This has gone far enough. Turn over the Apache woman and all charges will be dropped. You can keep your ranch and go on with your life." "And if I refuse?" Williams hesitated. "Then I can't protect you, Captain." Ethan's voice carried clearly across the yard. "Tell Hargrove that Elena is under my protection. Anyone who wants her will have to come through me first." Williams nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. He turned his horse and rode back to the waiting men. Hargrove's face contorted with rage. He shouted something to his men, gesturing wildly toward the cabin. "Here they come," Ethan warned, retreating to the porch. The riders charged forward, rifles raised. Ethan and Elena took cover behind the reinforced porch railing. They held their fire until the first riders triggered the tripwires. 2 shotgun traps detonated simultaneously, the blast dropping 3 men from their saddles. The confusion gave Ethan and Elena their opening. Their rifles cracked in unison, the shots carefully placed. 2 more riders fell. The others scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and trees. A bullet splintered the wood beside Ethan's head. He ducked lower, spotting Thomas Malone, aiming for another shot. Ethan fired first, his bullet taking the young man in the shoulder. Thomas fell back with a cry of pain. "Thomas!" James Malone's anguished shout carried across the battlefield. The firefight intensified, bullets peppering the cabin from all sides. Ethan and Elena moved from window to window, firing when they had clear shots, conserving ammunition. They had prepared for this, but they were still desperately outnumbered. A bullet grazed Elena's arm. She hissed in pain, but continued firing, her determination unbroken. "We need to fall back to the inner room," Ethan said, as the barrage intensified. They had reinforced one of the interior walls, creating a final defensive position. Just as they were about to retreat, a new sound joined the chaos rifle fire from the woods behind the cabin, directed at Hargrove's men. Confused shouts rose from the attackers as they found themselves caught in a crossfire. "Calvin," Ethan breathed. The old sheriff had come through. The tide of battle shifted rapidly. Hargrove's men, expecting an easy victory against 2 defenders, found themselves pinned down by fire from multiple directions. Several threw down their weapons and fled. Others, including James Malone, dragged their wounded to safety. Through his rifle sight, Ethan spotted Hargrove himself crawling toward a horse, his expensive suit covered in dirt. Ethan took careful aim. One shot would end it all. His finger tensed on the trigger, then relaxed. Killing Hargrove would solve the immediate problem, but wouldn't bring justice for Elena's people. The banker needed to face legal consequences for his crimes. Instead, Ethan shifted his aim and shot the horse. Hargrove would not escape today. As suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire ceased. Hargrove's remaining men had retreated, leaving behind their dead and wounded. From the woods emerged Calvin Turner, accompanied by 6 grim-faced men, a mixture of former soldiers, small ranchers who had suffered under Hargrove's financial manipulations, and 2 Apache who had been living and working in town. "Sorry we're late," Calvin called out, approaching the cabin. "Had to convince these boys it was worth risking their necks." Ethan stepped off the porch to meet them, Elena close behind. You've got good timing, old man. Calvin's eyes shifted to Elena. So this is the witness. She met his gaze steadily. I am Elena, last of my tribe. Calvin nodded respectfully. Not for long. My nephew rode out last night with messages for both the land office and the Indian agent. Should be federal men here within 2 days. Ethan surveyed the battlefield. Hargrove won't wait that long for another attempt. Where is he now? Pinned down behind that outcrop, Calvin replied, gesturing to a formation of rocks 100 yards away. Got 4 men with him, including the sheriff. The rest cut and run. We need to hold this position until help arrives, Ethan said. Calvin grinned. Already planned for that. Got supplies in those packs, and these boys are all good shots. The next 36 hours were a tense stalemate. Hargrove's remaining men attempted several probing attacks, all repulsed with minimal casualties on Ethan's side. By the second night, it was clear the banker was growing desperate. Under cover of darkness, Hargrove himself approached the cabin, a white flag in his hand. Ethan met him in the yard, Remington drawn, Calvin covering him from the porch. You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Captain Blackwood, Hargrove said, his composure cracking. But I'm a reasonable man. Let's discuss terms. The only terms I'm interested in are your surrender to federal authorities, Ethan replied coldly. Hargrove's face twisted in a sneer. Do you have any idea who I am? I own judges from here to Denver. Any charges against me will disappear before they reach a courtroom. Perhaps? Ethan conceded, but Elena's testimony about the massacre won't disappear, and I suspect once the federal agents start digging, they'll find plenty more crimes to add to the list. Fear flickered across Hargrove's face. $20,000. Cash. You and the squaw disappear, never to return. Her name is Elena, and she's not for sale. Hargrove's hand moved suddenly toward his coat. Ethan reacted instantly, the Remington clearing its holster before the banker's hand reached whatever weapon he concealed. The bullet took Hargrove in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. That was foolish, Ethan said, keeping the revolver trained on the fallen man. Very foolish. Calvin approached, rifle at the ready. Want me to finish him off? Ethan shook his head. No, he faces justice the right way. Bind his wound and secure him in the root cellar. As dawn broke on the third day, riders approached from the east, a column of blue-coated cavalry escorting 2 men in civilian clothes. The federal agents had arrived. What followed was a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and legal proceedings. Elena's testimony, combined with papers found in Hargrove's possession, revealed a conspiracy extending beyond the massacre of her tribe. The banker had systematically eliminated or intimidated anyone who stood between him and the resources he coveted. The federal Indian agent, a surprisingly honorable man named Samuel Parker, officially recognized Elena as the last surviving member of her tribe, granting her legal claim to their ancestral lands. The gold mine that Hargrove had coveted so desperately would fund the rebuilding of her people's community as other scattered Apache came to join her. Justice, so rare for Native Americans in that era, had been served not through the local courts Hargrove controlled, but through federal intervention prompted by one woman's courage and one man's sense of honor. 1 year later, Ethan stood on his porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. His ranch had prospered, partly due to a reward offered by the federal government for helping uncover Hargrove's crimes. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention. Elena approached on horseback, dressed in a mixture of traditional Apache attire and practical frontier clothing. As the recognized leader of the new Apache settlement 5 miles to the west, she had become a respected figure in the region, bridging 2 worlds with dignity and wisdom. She dismounted gracefully, joining him on the porch. The new school building is finished, she reported. Children from both settlements will attend together. Ethan nodded approvingly. Integration, it's a start. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the dying light. Their relationship had evolved into something unique, not romance in the traditional sense, but a bond forged in fire and blood, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. I received a telegram today. Ethan said eventually. "From an old army friend at the border, there's trouble brewing near the Mexican line. A band of raiders targeting ranchers." Elena studied his face, reading the unspoken question. "You want to go?" "People need help," he said simply. She nodded, understanding the man before her in a way few ever could. "Then go. My people will watch over your land until you return." Ethan gazed toward the horizon, where new adventures awaited. He had spent years hiding from life after losing Elizabeth. Now he found himself drawn back into the world, a man with purpose again. "I'll be back," he promised. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her solemn features. "I know, honor always returns home." As the last light faded from the sky, Ethan Blackwood began preparations for his journey, his Remington 1858 at his side, a weapon that had once served in war, then in personal survival, and now in the pursuit of justice for those who could not find it themselves. Some men fought for glory, others for wealth. Ethan Blackwood had found something rarer on the American frontier, a cause worth fighting for, and the peace that comes from knowing one's place in a harsh but beautiful world. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but as long as men and women of honor stood against the darkness, there was hope for a better future. One worth building, one worth defending, one worth passing on to those who would come after.